I've got to ask, how did the name Tom Talks Rubbish come about?
So basically, I don't know if you ever watched the early days of my channel,
I have
but
not.
it was literally everything that I could think of: movie reviews, TV show reviews, even I think I did my top 10 favorite flavors of ice cream. Do you know what I mean? This
Yeah, yeah.
was this channel was a pandemic project. It was something to keep me occupied during the second lockdown because during the first one I was a bit of a depressed mess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so basically it's like Tom Talks absolute whatever you want.
Exactly. That was literally it. And when I branched off into the interview side, it's as somebody that I recorded with recently said, it made me sound quite self-deprecating and quite like disarming, for lack of a better word, they said to me. So I just kept it.
Okay, okay. So yes, we're talking to Tom Talks Rubbish. We're just gonna be having a general chat about wrestling and stuff like that, as always, but roll the intro. Now, of course, we're on Friday. How's the week been, mate?
Really good, man. Really busy. Not so much in the content side, but with civilian life, as I call it, really busy. Sort of finishing out the content for 2024 and now looking ahead to 2025.
Wow, how do you plan so far ahead? Because I can only plan month to month before I get confused.
A lot of planning. Like I will say this, my editor Jeff Eaton, that makes everything look good, like the generic question segment and things like that. He helps me a lot by writing down, okay, this is the order that I think we should do it. Any changes, things like that, just to let you know, because we normally go. Say I send him a project, it's normally 3 weeks in advance
Mm-hmm.
that he'll send it back to me. He'll go, just so you know, you've got 6 weeks worth of content in the can. For example, if that makes sense, like you
Yeah.
need to get recording or like don't send me anymore. We've got enough for the end of the year, sort of thing, which was the message I got the other day.
I suppose that's good though. Means that you're planning, like ahead.
Oh yeah, definitely, because I'm really proud of, and this is more of a content question rather than a wrestling one. I'm really proud of the fact that since I started my channel in July of 2021, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
the we have not missed a Friday at 6 p.m. UK time upload.
And I think the good thing about that is you can preset it to upload, can't you? Anyway.
Exactly, that's what I do now. I'll Jeff will send me the files. I will go boom, 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 boom. Description all done. 6 p.m. For example, one that went up today, the interview with John Alba from the Matt Hardy pod went up. 6 p.m. went up straight away. So all I had to do was a little bit of promotion.
There you go. And I think that's probably one thing. I mean, I will be honest, I struggle with during the promotional side of stuff. I'm still trying to learn that, even like 2 years in.
So am I, man. Like that's I'm definitely still learning, but I believe in this quote, and I've slightly butchered it, but fair enough. If you're not learning, you're not growing, sort of thing.
No, I think that's a fair little comment and stuff like that. So, talk a little bit about obviously starting the interview side. What obviously made you want to branch to that?
So this is kind of a two-prong answer. So I will give you the two versions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
During the pandemic, I had carers. I still have carers, but I had carers who came from different walks of life, and I had family and friends, and the pandemic affected them in different ways, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, the interview I did was with my former support worker Drew because he decided to move away during the pandemic. It wasn't during any of the tears before anyone has a go and things like. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So when he came down to visit me, it was just like, should we do an interview about how moving during the pandemic was different? And then we had a few new carers start during the pandemic. So I was curious to know, how did their caring careers start differently in the pandemic to if life was normal, things like that. And then I had some different carers. I interviewed a friend who'd had a baby during the pandemic to talk about how that was different and things like that. But the wrestling side, that's kind of a well-known story now, but it's a decent story of like, you know who Adam Pacitti is, don't you?
Of course I do.
Exactly. So I stuck up this interview bit, this video, because we were talking about at the start of this that my channel was just a box of frogs at the start. It was whatever I felt like talking about, and to start off with, my I stuck up this video being like, after I'd done these few interviews and found interviews fun, these are 10 people that I'd love to interview, and the Cultaholic crew was on there. And I don't know how, because at that time, me and Adam I didn't have any followers in wrestling media, so I don't know how he saw it. But myself, Adam saw it and was like, "Oh, if you want to do it, I'll." At this time, I didn't know how anything like this or Zoom worked, so
Yeah.
I was a bit naive in that respect. He was like, "If you want to do it, I'll edit and record it for you." And I'm thinking, "Excuse me, what?" Like, my channel at this time, I believe, had 50 subs. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I was definitely thinking like, excuse me, what? Like, how? Help? Like, what's happening? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's one of those where you'd have to like pinch yourself.
Oh, I did, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also. What was that first interview like? You know, like obviously the wrestling side of stuff. Talk about obviously that first interview you did. What was that like as an experience?
What, in the wrestling one or the first one with my carer?
With the wrestling.
Horrible. Because I don't know if you've watched that one, but I talk over him. I shout questions. I am an overexcited panda, as someone in the wrestling content creation space would say. And I don't like that interview because I
Mhm.
don't have the format that I have now. Any question that's just off the top of my head is coming to me. I'm asking and things like that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that interview, but I'm glad I got to do it because we all start somewhere. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And I always remember the first one I did, and it wasn't a bad interview. Do you know what I mean? It's stuff like that. I mean, I still obviously talk to the guy to this day and stuff, but it's one of those. It's crazy to look back at that one to where you are now to see how much you've evolved.
Oh, definitely. Like, I ask my guests this a lot, and I would be curious to know what people, what my past self, my 2021 self would think of the content I'm producing now. Because if you watch them back, it was a lot of people sending me files because I didn't know how Zoom worked. I didn't
Hmm.
have Jeff on board as my editor and things like that, really, man.
No, absolutely. And I presume you pre-record yours.
Yeah, because as we spoke about when we were doing this, for whatever reason, this laptop doesn't like live streams. Always seems to crap out when we're on live streaming. Doesn't seem to enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of these where I obviously do them live. I do obviously do the occasional pre-recordings and stuff like that, but I've always liked the idea, John, going live because you get more involvement, John, stuff like that. But like I said, if your internet's playing up and stuff like that, you're still obviously pushing content out anyway.
Yeah. That's the thing, man. Like I said to you, I'm very proud of the fact that whether I've been sick, whether I've been on holiday, we haven't missed an episode. In I started the first episode with Adam went up July the 2nd, I believe,
Hmm.
2021, and we haven't missed an episode since.
Wow. And how do you stick to that schedule? Because I know sometimes like family stuff can play a part or something. You know, there's always something cropping up.
Batch recording, like we've spoke about at the start of this and off camera, like when I'm in that podcasting mode, I will, for example, I remember Sunday a couple of weeks ago, I recorded like 3 episodes back to back. Does that make sense? That's
Yeah,
three
yeah.
weeks of content right there.
Wow, crazy. I mean, I can't even do like one a week without even getting like struggling.
No, and I understand that everybody's different. Like, this is the thing. I've found what works for me. people will find what works for them.
No, absolutely. And how long did it take you, obviously, to like come up with like your own style and stuff, and like your own format and stuff? How long did that take?
So again, that's sort of a question I have two different answers for, if that's okay. I
Yeah.
sort of discovered my own style, I'd say around, what was the first interview I felt really hit? Good question, actually. I can't remember the first interview that I was like definitely hit. But then when we went into sort of what I call phase 3 of my channel, if we were in the MCU, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
when I moved into independent living, this is when I really found my style and wasn't distracted by anyone coming in my house, anyone or coming in my bedroom, should I say, or people just wandering in and out, or like being restricted on times of when I could create and things like that. That's when I really started to find my style.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that obviously doing content creating, you're always thinking ahead? Because I always do.
Yeah, definitely. Like I'm guilty even in the interview of when someone gives an answer, my interviewer brain has already I don't know if you do this, has already online decided, okay, that's going to be a short. Do you know what I mean? That's going to be a short on YouTube. That's going to be a clip that we use. That's going to be something that could be a headline. My interviewer brain is always thinking.
I hate to admit that, but that is actually really, really accurate.
Oh yeah, definitely, man.
That is absolutely crazy that you've said that. Because when I'm recording stuff like you said, you're always thinking in your head, going, "Yeah, that'll be a good clip. That'll be a good thing. That'll be a good that."
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So talk a little about some of obviously your favorite interviews you've done.
So to peel the curtain back, at the start of the year, I will have my top 10 favorite interviews of the year. And currently I have 4 big ones that I really like on my channel, right? I have obviously actually I have 5. The Adam one will always be special because it was the first one. Not a fan of it now, and if he ever wanted to come back on, I feel like we could have a great conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And things like that. Not a fan, but it got me to where I am, so I'm really happy with it in that respect. My latest interview with Brian Zane that went out, really happy with that. That was the one. I don't know if you remember, like it was almost my Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25 moment. You know, like
Yes.
when he was promoting 26 afterwards and talking about why he retired. That was almost my moment of, you know what? That might have been the one to end it on because it was perfect. All the questions were firing on all cylinders. The what's the word I'm looking for? The technology worked. The fun there was great. The response was good. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So that was the one that I was like, that might have been the one to end it on. But then I think I recorded the very next day and was like, no, I can never get this up. This is too fun. But so that's one. He's a controversial figure, and don't get me wrong, guys, I don't agree with what he comes out with some of the time. But I'm really proud of my JDMY one because I really felt like we got to see the man behind JDMY, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Chris Van Vliet, from a selfish perspective, because that's been the one that I was like, he was my big bucket list one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, where I was like, he's the GOAT in wrestling interviews, in my opinion. I don't know about your opinion, Liam, but he's my wrestling GOAT. Does that make sense?
He's definitely well up there. It's probably one of my favorites as well.
So yeah, he was the one that I was like, yeah, okay. If I could get him on, that'd be very cool. So yeah, that was one. And one final one. This is more of a personal one. Actually, I have 2 sort of personal ones. One is, I don't know if you managed to check this one out, but my one with Dom Smith when I first moved house. It was the era where I was like, okay, this is Tom Talks Rubbish, his new phase. And like, we're going to be able to record some good content. We're going to be able to get some good shorts out of this. Do you know what I mean? Because we're not distracted by people coming in and out. And then finally, the one that I really enjoyed because she was so open is last year. might have been 2022 actually. I know it went up in 2023, but it might have been recorded in 2022, if that makes sense. I can't remember. Was my interview with Fiona from Inside the Ropes, because she was so open about her alcoholism, her work with Inside the Ropes, and how that affected it, how her alcoholism affected her kids and everything in between, that I was really proud of that. And the response I got of that was, because I don't know how guilty you were of this, but when I first started, I was a interruptus, if you know what I mean, talking
I
over
was
people a
guilty of that
lot.
as well.
Yeah, talking over people a lot, man. So this was the one where people were like, you really listened during this one and really bounced off of her questions. So yeah, they'd be my main 4 or 5, I think.
Yeah, and a good thing is, and you brought a valid point up there, is when you're doing interviews and stuff like that, there's always them stories where it don't matter if you're going to do another 20 interviews after that, you're always going to remember them types of stories, and I can think of countless ones myself.
Oh yeah, definitely, man.
So, I mean, I can think of loads. I mean, I could speak a whole hour about that and stuff like that. So, a lot of people ask me this question and stuff like that, and I want your obviously honest answer with this is, how do we get the guests on the show? Do you know what I mean? How do you get to interview a guy? What's the process?
It's basically just begging and hoping. Like, I'm not afraid because I can't travel and make someone's acquaintance. Because for people that may not know, I've got something called cerebral palsy. So I'm wheelchair bound. And so that obviously makes traveling a lot harder. I am not afraid to sometimes go, hey, on Twitter or X, to go, hey, um, Denise, for example. I haven't done this yet, but like how I got my gym. Oh, one that I didn't mention, my Jimmy Van from Fightful one, because that was an exclusive interview because he doesn't do a lot of them. But I'd interviewed Sean Ross Sapp around this time, and he, to use a wrestling parlance, put me over. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And said, no, you should do Tom's show. I know you don't do a lot of these, but you should think about doing Tom's show. And so that, I don't know what came over me, but one night I was sitting on Twitter and I was like, would love to complete the set of Listing Your Boy at the time and have Jimmy on. So I was like, in for a penny, in for a pound, as we say in England. At Jimmy Van, can I interview you? Here's an interview with Sean Rossap to show my work. And I'm not afraid to do that. That's backfired a couple of times of people being like, that's unprofessional. That's not what you should do. But most people are like, oh, well done for being brave. Like, yeah, I'll come on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, one thing I always do is when because I obviously email a lot as well, is when that person gets back to you, it's kind of like a relief because a lot of the times when you don't hear back from like people you've reached out to, this is how I feel. I'm obviously I'll get your thoughts in a second. Is you start to think to yourself, shit, have I said something wrong? Do you know what I mean? You're always that. I've always got that doubt in my head. I don't know
Yeah.
about yourself.
Oh, definitely, man. Like I have that thought in my head all the time. Does that make sense? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, did I upset them during? Because like I'm someone that if they say follow up, I will follow up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've never actually had the word follow up. I mean, I was just checking off of my own accord.
Yeah. Like, oh, I've had people go, not at this time, but follow up in 6 months, and I will do that. And when they don't reply, then I always think, oh, was they not being sincere? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've had that a few times where I said they're up for it, and then you reach back out to them like a month later, and they don't reply, and you just think, oh fuck, I've said something wrong.
Oh, good, yeah. That's the one. Yeah, that's the thing. But at the end of the day, man, I'm really happy with the people I've got to connect with, so I cannot complain.
Absolutely. And what have you learned, obviously, about yourself by doing these interviews?
No isn't such a bad word. Does that make sense? I used to hate the word no as a kid. Does that make sense? Because you'd think, oh, mum said I can't have ice cream. That's really bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now it's like, oh, yeah, no ain't such a bad word. It actually helps you grow as a person.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
sounds like really hippie. I do apologize.
Yeah, I think the thing is for me, I mean, I've just learned so much about myself because I've always been a quiet person. So when I'm doing these like interviews, I mean, it's kind of like a two-part question. Like, obviously, you've done a few like that. Is number one, it's like gaining confidence for me, but the other thing as well is you're getting to know these people outside the ring. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's why like I feel like I've found a I don't want to say an audience, but I know what you know what I mean, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
it's like I found an audience because I think people forget because the question I always start with is where do you first discover wrestling as a fan? And I think people forget that Sean Ross Sapp started as a fan, John Albert started as a fan, the Cultaholic What Culture Crew started as fans. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. It is, and that's the key thing there. Do you mean they're always starting as fans? I mean, it's absolutely incredible to learn, how they got into wrestling.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's why since I've got into the short game a couple of months ago, that'll always be a short that goes up because I think people are curious to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, is there any guests obviously you'd like to obviously interview? Who's on that bucket list? Who's the top people you like to talk to?
Again, I feel very lucky in that respect, the people I've got to cross off. So I don't have Simon Miller's still one that I'm like, yeah, that'd be really cool to tick off. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Simon Miller, Denise Salcedo, a lot of these people, now that I've found my interview styles, are like, I'd love to have you back on from the early days. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And do you ever actually watch your stuff back?
Oh, I do all the time. This is a trick that, because I have a few people that I consider mentors in this space, which is Dom Smith from Give Me a Whole Year and Wrestle Spear. And I don't know if you've ever checked out his stuff, but Ben Veal from the Wrestling Life podcast.
I have not.
You should do, man. I will send you a link. He's very good. But that was one because we share an editor, and that was one thing he told me when I had him on my show was to create clips like we was talking about earlier. He will watch his stuff back as a fan. He'll get a coffee when Jeff sends in the interview and sit and watch the whole thing, or go for a walk and listen to it as a podcast, like some people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the thing
And
is
then
for
that
me, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, let me finish. Sorry, man. That helps me. That helps him figure out. That'd work as a short because I'd watched that as a short, and I've learned that trick. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing was, and so I didn't mean to interrupt there, was
Sorry, man. I do
it took
apologize.
it took me, I think, about 4 or 5 months to watch my stuff back because I was kind of really critical during my own work.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm still critical, but learning that trick has really helped me to connect with the questions that I realize my audience like, or what gets engagement on Twitter and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree there. One of the things a lot of people ask me is what's the key thing when it's doing interviews? And I've said it countless times, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, is the research.
Yeah, research, but listening as well. I think that's a fine balance too, because I have found, I don't know about you, Liam, but if I'm researching someone too much, I will tell their story rather than them telling their story. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I mean that's the key thing as well, is I always kind of like I always ask the question, but I already know the answer, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. That's another good point. Yeah, like that's another good way of putting that. If I'm honest.
Yeah, that's the one thing I've always done is like, I'm going to ask you this question, but I know the answer anyway, but you're going to tell it anyway because you get like the story.
Definitely. And one thing I think is good is because I've learned something in therapy, which is like memory prompts. I don't know what the technical term is, but like I'll always start a question sometimes being like, you talked about this, blah, blah, blah. So it remembers me to talk about that, if that makes sense, to connect their last question with their last answer with my next question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because it kind of keeps that, flow going.
Exactly.
So that's kind of fascinating you've said that. One of the things, obviously, I do, and again, it's like if you've got information but you're not 100% sure on it, I always say this, like the term, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, I do that as well. But I will also, I don't know if you do this, I will go over my research with my guest before we start and just say, is there anything I've missed?
I used to do that at the start, but now it's like the flow goes a little bit better. The one thing obviously I do instead of
I
that is
mean, before we record.
okay, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes do that. It just all depends on the guest. A lot of the times, I always get the guest going, "Nah, let's just, you know what I mean? Let's just wing it. Let's just go straight in and
Oh
stuff like
yeah,
that."
yeah, yeah. Most people, I mean, I don't want to say I'm a big deal because I'm not, but I do know that a few people have seen my work before I've asked them. So they're like, I understand the concept of your show. Like, I'm looking forward to this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd posted obviously on my socials about you coming on the show, and Jordan actually sent a question for you actually, and it says, "What keeps you going?"
Enjoyment. Like, I really enjoy talking to people and learning about their fandom and stuff. And it's like, that's the big thing. If this became work and a job and like, I need a podcast for this week, but I've got no desire to do it, that's when I'd walk away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a well said answer. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a good little answer. Do you, I've only suffered this once since I've obviously been doing all the podcast stuff. Is burnout? Have you ever had burnout?
Not like a complete, like, I'm gonna put my laptop in the cupboard, my microphone's gonna go up on eBay. Not like that bad burnout, but I've had that. Okay, you've done quite a few podcasts this week. Maybe we need to take a week off next week or the week after. I've never been that burned out that, like, okay, I don't know if I can continue.
Interesting. I've had it once where I didn't. Only thing I did was took some time off social media for a couple of days.
Oh yeah, that's one thing since I've moved that social media is only on my computer because I've found that if it's on my phone, I will just sit overnight doom scrolling. I call it. I don't know if you've heard of that term.
I have not. Please tell me.
I'll almost go looking for the bad, whether it's in my own comments, someone else's comments, the news, etc.
Interesting. I've learned something new today.
Mm.
Dear. So you spoke earlier, obviously, about the shorts type thing, and I'm just looking back at our messages, and you said that the rest that you obviously consume is most the clips and stuff. Is there a reason for that, or is that just like so much to try and process?
It's time. It's like since I've moved, I've got back into boxing. I've got hence the picture I sent you, by the way. And does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, hence the picture where I sent you. And I've got to know people in my local area. I started going to the gym a lot more and things like. It's just time. If there's a match that people say, "Oh, you should check this out," or a segment, I will make time to do that. But I just don't have 2, 3 hours in my day at the moment to sit and watch a show.
Yeah, the one thing we always say, obviously, on this show as well, every time we record on the Saturday, is there's so much wrestling during the week, it's impossible to try and, like, catch up on it all.
Oh, definitely. Like I I both envy and empathize with people like Cultaholic and What Culture that have to know everything about wrestling. And that's one thing Brian Zane said to me. I don't know if you managed to check that interview out at all.
I saw it briefly. I've not seen the whole thing.
He basically said the reason he stopped reviewing wrestling was he had to add takes for everything, even on social media, and that was exhausting, and that led to burnout. So I still want to be a wrestling fan, so I don't want to be burned out and like I don't know what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So you earlier on, before we came on the air, you said that obviously you live obviously not far from London. Have you managed to check out obviously like the local like promotion thing in London and stuff?
Not really London and not really my local area since I've moved, but pre-moving where I was living before in Harlow, they had a company called, well, I know they're more of a UK company, but WrestleForce.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they was in Harlow, I was a regular to their shows. So I do miss live wrestling, and 2025 I hope to get back to it.
Yeah, I've always like trying to travel and stuff like that, and I think that's probably the key thing as well as the traveling and time.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing as well. And also, as dumb as this sounds, but I obviously need a companion or a carer to come with me, and I don't want that person to be like, wrestling's fake, do you know what I mean?
Yep, I get that question even at work, and it still pisses me off.
Oh God, yeah, but I think I'm at the point now where it's like wrestling's in my blood. I'm always going to be a fan, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one final question, obviously, before we head off for stuff, because this has been an amazing chat, is for people obviously listening to this who's thinking about going down the route of interviews and stuff, what advice would you give them?
So I have three, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Just start, whether it's interviewing, whether it's talking, whether it's interviewing, whether it's gaming, just start. Your first video is gonna suck. You know what I mean? Nobody's first video is really good. Do you know what I mean? Just start, and the community will follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably the best one. Just go with it. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. And my thing is listen to what your audience want, because I came up with, and I've never actually told this story before, so you're getting a bit of an exclusive here. But
Ooh.
like the reason I asked the question generic wrestling questions.
Yes.
Like their favorite match, pay-per-view card, wrestler's entrance team, tag team, and wrestler, is because during my early interviews with Cultaholic, What Culture, etc., I was asking them, and people were like, "Your interviews are good, but they're very generic questions sometimes." Like, and so I just went, and then one day I got a message from, I believe it was Andy H. Murray, from What Culture, being like, "Thank you, man. Ever since I did your interviews, I've not been asked a question what my favorite match is for ages." So that's where the slogan came from of we're going to do the segment called Generic Wrestling Questions. This is where I'll ask, I'll use you as an example, Liam. Liam, his favorite match, favorite wrestlers, favorite pay-per-view card, favorite wrestlers, entrance team, tag team, and wrestler. Basically, the questions I assume Liam might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Please go watch this.
Interesting. That's kind of interesting theory and stuff like that, because I obviously go down a slightly different route. Like, I obviously, you ask your general questions like getting into wrestling and stuff like that. But one thing, there's a question which I ask a lot, and it stumps the wrestlers, but it's not designed to stump them. The idea of the question is, it's for people who's obviously not familiar with yourself. Why should fans go check you out? So this is kind of like a way for like them to one, think on the spot, and two, do you know what I mean, promote themselves a bit.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that is also where my question came from. You talk about promoting there. The wrap-up question that I do, which is, I believe firmly, Liam, that we're all sort of going to live forever in a very, very strange way if you think about the world. So I believe if they had one piece of content they want to be remembered by, what is it? And if there's one piece of content you definitely don't want someone to check out, what is that? So that's where that came from as well.
Interesting. It's really fascinating. Do you know what I mean? Just to listen, do you know, your side of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, definitely.
Really, really fascinating. Do you know what I mean? I really enjoyed today's chat and stuff like that. So before we obviously end this, obviously live, is there anything you want to promote, man?
Like as we said, you said this is going out on Monday, right?
Correct.
So this week, my John Albert one would have been up since Friday. Make sure you check that out. Just give me a like and a subscribe on YouTube. Check out some shorts that will go up this week, because next week's interviews with the great rising star in American wrestling ring announcing, Jordan Castle. So yeah, thank you for having me, man. Like, I would be honored to flip the script one day when I start doing interviews again in 2025.
Hey, all you gotta do, mate, is just hit me up and I will gladly be there.
Let's do it, man. Thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure.
Not a problem. Cheers for watching, guys.